And as we go through the presentation today, I'm going to ask that you keep a couple of things in mind. And that is your tools that you want for your children and time, not only for your child, but for yourself. And we'll circle back to this, but just keep those two things in mind: the tools that you want for your kids and the time that you have for yourself and for your child. We'll start off by first answering the question, what is Yale? So, as I explained, that is an acronym for our school, and it is a tuition free charter school, and it has a statewide zone. So, in Georgia, all charter schools are public schools. So, therefore, they are tuition free. You pay for your public schools, of course, through your taxes. Um, Another interesting fact about Yale is its statewide zone. So you can live anywhere in the state of Georgia, or the child can live anywhere in the state of Georgia and attend Yale. We are a whole school dual language immersion school. So what that means is that everybody at the school, every single student, every teacher, every administrator, all of the board members, we are all invested in dual language immersion. This is opposed to other schools, particularly other public schools, that may have a dual language immersion or a DLI program within its school, but it's not the whole school. It is usually one class per grade, and that class is separate. And frankly, they follow a different school day, a different kind of school than everybody else in that school. Whereas for us, it's everyone. Everyone is learning another language through dual language immersion, which allows us to also be have a whole school focus on culture, because everyone is invested in DLI. We can have events and special times for our entire school to participate in cultural events, cultural activities. And it's not just partitioned off or just for a small set of kids. In particular, if any parent were to have a question or need some additional information, anybody in the school is going to understand that the parent and his or her child is involved with dual language immersion. It's not just a very small percentage of the school. Also, something that sets Yale apart is our advanced curriculum and our academic achievement. We're going to talk more about our curriculum here in just a few minutes. So, but first, let's talk a little bit more about what dual language immersion is. For our dual language immersion at Yale, we follow a 50-50 model. And that means that half the day is taught in English and the other half of the day is taught in one of the two languages that we offer, which is Korean or Mandarin. And usually what the students do is that they switch right before or right after lunch. And what I mean by that is that students will have half of their day, let's say, start off in English. And then when they go to lunch, that's kind of marks the half point of the day. And then after lunch, the other half of the day is spent in their target language, whether it's Korean or Mandarin. So what they're not doing is bouncing from one class is in English, the next class is in Mandarin, the next subject is in English, the next subject is in Mandarin. It's not like that. Whole half of the day in English, the whole half of the other part of the day is in your target language. The subjects that are taught in English are English, math, and social studies. And then the subjects that are taught in the target language are all of your connections, which includes PE, music, art, computer, STEM classes. Oops, let me go back, and science. So there is a methodology to making it this way. Primarily, of course, English classes are going to be in English. But in looking at math in particular, because we do understand that quite a few DLI programs put math in the target language. However, through surveying parents prior to opening this school, we found that a lot of parents were apprehensive and anxious about math being in another language. Although studies show that math can be taught in another language and students can do well in math, just to go ahead and get rid of any anxiety parents might have about math being taught in another language, we went ahead and put it in English. We do understand, and it is true, that your child will always be tested in standardized tests in both English and math, English and math. That's starting from this age in elementary school all the way through high school, college, and going into graduate and professional schools. It is English and math. So we just hope that we put that concern at rest with parents. And then, of course, social studies in English, because social studies is easier to teach in English because it usually encompasses American history as well as Georgia history. And it is easier to teach that in English. Our subjects that are in the target language are not by coincidence. The connections classes, which include PE, music, art, those types of things that kids really love. We find that when we put that in the target language, kids associate that part of the day, that DLI part of the day, with being a fun part of the day. They have their target language, which can be challenging, but having all of the fun classes associated with the connections tends to work quite well, pairing it with the target language. And science, of course, most parents know that kids really love science when they're at this age, and it also works well with putting it in the target language. So let's talk about why DLI for your child. So the first aspect that we're going to talk about are the physical benefits. And this is something that I think is often overlooked. However, what studies find over the course of many decades is that people who can speak more than one language, or are at least studying more than one language, tend to have stronger, healthier brains. And what we mean by that is not necessarily that all of a sudden they become smarter per se. I'll get to that in just a minute, but we're talking about the actual health of the brain as an organ of the body, as a muscle. Because if you're speaking more than one language, you're using more areas of your brain than a monolingual speaker. So these physical benefits, what it manifests as is staving off brain diseases. Primarily, we're talking about Alzheimer's and dementia for a longer amount of time than monolingual speakers. So for folks who speak more than one language, we're talking about an average of about 5 years is what studies show. So as we move into the next set of benefits, it's relative but different. Cognitive benefits, which we're looking at superior problem-solving skills, efficient decision-making, better multitasking, and increased attention and memory. And, you know, who doesn't want to have that for their child as well as for themselves? The test performance is the next category. This is an area that most parents are very interested in, particularly when they are considering DLI because they don't want their child to not achieve as well as they could if they were learning everything in English, right? But here again, studies show that children who are in a DLI program, they test as well as or better in every subject as non-DLI or monolingual speakers. The important part of this is that so those students who are in DLI, meaning they're learning another language, not only in a class, but immersed in the language for part of the day, being taught in that language, that they're not falling behind in any way. Much actually to the contrary, they do just as well or better than their counterparts who are only learning in one language. So finally, we get down to a second language, which is maybe the main reason why a lot of parents want their children in a DLI program so that they can speak another language. And with DLI, it's not just a matter of speaking another language. We're talking about reading and writing in another language at a proficient level. And that is what DLI is able to deliver for students, especially if they start at the very youngest age or the very youngest grade, which is kindergarten. All right, so now we'll look at our curriculum and instruction. As a public school, of course, we follow the Georgia standards. It's the same standards for all public schools in the state of Georgia. Those standards can be reviewed yourself through the Department of Education, the Georgia Department of Education website. We also, like all other public schools, have a talented and gifted program, but different than other public schools. Our curriculum, the whole school's curriculum, uses a gifted curriculum. I'm going to get back to that in just a second here, but first let me explain what differentiated instruction is. So we use differentiated instruction, which is what many, if not most, maybe even all elementary schools do use differentiated instruction to a certain degree. And basically what that is grouping. So if you will, think about your kindergarten classes where kids are coming into kindergarten with all different levels of skills, academic skills. Some kids are already reading, maybe even writing sentences, or some kids are still learning their alphabet, the ABCs, right? And so what teachers generally do is after they assess, they start to group so that they're able to teach students where they are. Instead of teaching all the kids, let's everybody learn our ABCs, when some kids are so past that, they differentiate and group so that the kids who are already reading, that's where they pick up from. The kids who are just learning their ABCs, that's where they pick up at. So part of the reason that we explain differentiated instruction is that it's not just on the side of the day with English or even math. It's also on the side of the day that is the target language, because kids are going to come in with many different skill levels with their target language. Some kids may already speak it, they just don't read and write. And some kids have never been exposed to their chosen target language. So we already know that kids are going to come in at different levels, which is why we use differentiated instruction for both sides of the day. Now, let's get to our integrated curriculum model, or ICM, which is the curriculum that we use. It is and was created for gifted classrooms. However, we got to ICM because it marries well with differentiated instruction, which is a cornerstone for DLI schools. Because of that, it works well for our school, the integrated curriculum model. It also happens to be a gifted curriculum. That also tends to work well for our school because in research before opening our school, we found that families who are very interested and drawn toward DLI also tend to be families who place a lot of importance and priority on academics in the household. And families who do that often have kids who become motivated learners or highly able learners. And these learners tend to learn quicker and need to be challenged, which is why the ICM works well for our school as a whole school DLI. And then also, we are a project-based learning school. So you'll find that kids are often working on different projects throughout the year. So I went over this already in explaining what ICM is. And these points I've already pointed out. DLI attracts parents and students who are academically motivated. Motivated students are often highly able learners. Highly able learners test well using ICM. And ICM is a curriculum that can be modified up or down for every different learner. Next, we're going to talk about our math curriculum, which is Singapore Math. And here on this slide, you see the top scoring countries in math in particular. But what this slide also shows is that Singapore Math tends to affect scoring in not just math, but in other subjects as well. And I mean, the bottom line with Singapore Math is that year over year, decade over decade, the performance, the scores with respect to Singapore Math and what it produces, it speaks for itself. So here at the top, you have Singapore, which is the creator, developer of Singapore Math. You have the math scores in red, the science scores in purple, the reading scores in light blue, and overall here in navy. So here is Singapore with its math score, way over here. Then science, then reading. But if you'll look, these scores are all higher than the next highest countries with their scoring. And we only put the top 8 countries here just so it would fit on the slide and you can still read it. Some of you may be wondering, where is the USA? It is not on the slide because it is number 26 for this particular year, which is the latest year that we have the results for. And the US, frankly, has been around that number, scoring or ranking, for quite some time. Somewhere between 26 to 28 is where the US has been scoring. But if you look at these countries, we can't say that every single one of these countries uses Singapore Math, but a lot of these countries do approach math in a more, I would say, Asian way of breaking down math, of solving problems, which is similar to what Singapore Math does. All right. So real quick, here specifically are our scores with respect to last year, 2023. And you'll see that this is something that the Department of Education has on its website. You can go to the Georgia Department of Education, and this is the College and Career Ready Performance Index, or people often call it CCRPI. And you can look up any school in the state of Georgia. You can look up any school or any district, and you can see what their scores are. And we invite you to do so, because if these scores look okay to you, if you compare them with other schools, you'll find that these scores are quite fantastic. So please look at the website. Like I said, you can compare and look up any school in Georgia. So here we have the English Learners Long-Term Academic Achievement by Model and Program. And what we have in our school is not only just a 50-50 model, but we also have two-way DLI. As opposed to one-way DLI. And this is something that we can't necessarily program. It is just based on the students that come into your program. In Georgia, for the most part, other DLI programs tend to be one-way DLI, meaning that the vast majority of the students don't speak the target language, and they may never have been exposed to it. So their learning primarily comes from the teacher, one way. Two-way DLI is when you have a composition of students where there's at least 30% who already speak the target language. So at least a 30-70 split. It can be higher than that, certainly, but at least that. And that's called two-way DLI because the kids not only learn from the teacher, but they learn from each other. If any of you all already have kids, you probably have already experienced this, especially if they're already in school of some sort, whether it's preschool or otherwise, that kids learn from each other all the time. So what we find is that in two-way DLI, dual language immersion, the kids tend to learn faster, and their understanding of the language tends to be deeper. And that's what you see on this graph. All right, so why is Yale needed? And when Yale was first being developed, what was often discussed is the workforce development in Georgia, which is that in Georgia, we need more bilingual and biliterate people. So the reason why I stress biliterate, which is reading and writing, is that there are a lot of folks in Georgia who can speak maybe the language that their family speaks on a certain level, but it is not at a level to be able to take a job on an executive in an executive type position. And certainly the reading and writing skills tend to lag behind. So there is a need in Georgia for better language skills. So that's what the workforce development in Georgia is. We also want to give our kids a competitive edge locally, nationally, and internationally. So if a student or a person can achieve a certain academic level achievement with regard to college or grad school, professional school in one language, right? If they can have a certain proficiency level in a second language, what we tend to believe is that they can double their opportunities. And then we want to provide a more challenging curriculum on an elementary level, which is basically missing in regular, traditional, zoned elementary schools. If a child is advanced, whether they're gifted or they just, tend to learn very quickly, the average elementary public school doesn't really target towards those kids. They're all just on the same level, general education. But what Yale provides is not only the rigor of learning a second language, having half of the day being taught in another language, but also the advanced curriculum. And so finally, we just want to catch up with the rest of the world in our foreign language abilities. So real quick, let's go through our enrollment and lottery. Yale has a statewide zone, which I mentioned at the beginning. That means you can live anywhere in the state of Georgia, and as long as you can provide your own transportation, you can apply for and enroll at Yale. Our application time is, it starts on the first day of school in the second semester and goes to March 15th. And all applicants are admitted if there are more seats than there are applicants. So for example, if there are 20 seats available and there are 15 applicants, then all those applicants automatically get a seat. However, if there are more applicants than seats, then a lottery is conducted. And in that case, let's say, and I'm going to use more realistic numbers. Let's take, for example, kindergarten. This year, we have pre-set out that we will have 120 seats for this upcoming year in kindergarten. If we have 125 applicants, that means that whole grade goes into a lottery so that we can determine based on the lottery, and it's an electronic lottery system, so it happens very quickly, and every applicant is assigned a number. And those students who are assigned a number 1 to 120 are the ones who get a seat. And those who have numbers 121 through 125, they're on the wait list according to the number that they were assigned through the lottery. After this time, let's say someone misses the March 15th deadline, then they cannot participate in the lottery. However, what their number will be is based on when they apply. It is based on first come, first serve. So for someone who applied on March 16th, soon after midnight, then if they are that first applicant after the deadline, then after the lottery is completed, and let's say it's that same example, 125 applicants, then they're number 126. If there are open seats, then they are filled on a first come, first serve basis as well. For grades 2nd through 5th grade, the target language, there is a target language proficiency requirement, meaning that kids who are rising 2nd graders to rising 5th graders, they need to take a proficiency exam before they can apply. If a student or an applicant is a rising kindergarten or 1st grader, then there is no proficiency exam for them. All right. We also have before and after school. School begins at 8:30 and ends at 3:30, but our before school starts at 7:15 and ends at 8, which is when all students start to arrive. And then the after school goes from 3:30 to 6 p.m. And they have a set program where they get playtime. It's usually outside so they can get out and have some fresh air, stretch their legs, just play because they've been through a long day of school. And then they have a snack time and homework time in which they do receive help for their homework while they're at after school. Also, we offer enrichment classes after school. And as you can see, there are a lot of options for enrichment, from art and coding to chess and martial arts. There's also supplemental language classes, Mandarin and Korean. It can be supplemental or it can be a 3rd language. So let's say you are enrolled in the Korean track for school, you can take Mandarin after school as an enrichment class. And all of the enrichment classes do happen after school. There's a set up schedule, and we pick and vet through professionals who come to the school, and they teach their classes at the school. So, for example, Chinese dance, it's the Atlanta Chinese Dance Company that they have their own location, but they also teach classes at our school in our after school program. So parents aren't having to drive them back and forth from classes. It's just right there at the school. And then they can pick up their kids after those classes. All the prices are set and all the rules that go along with the class and the prices, it's set by these instructors. All right, so back to the tools and time. And with respect to time, I'm going to try to finish up here so we can get back on track with our time. But what we want to think about are the tools that you want for your kids. And if you're here and listening to this, I assume that one of the tools that you would want for your child is your child to speak another language. And one of those languages that you may be interested in is either Mandarin or Korean. So that's what we're talking about tools. But when we want those tools for our kids, how can we achieve that? And that is where DLI comes in. That is where a DLI school comes in. If what you want to do, the most that you can do for your child is what most parents often say, what they want to do for their child, or they want to achieve for their child is a really solid, good education. That kind of leads you to the question of what is the most that you can do for your child within school, because of course it's required. So how can you maximize the time that they spend while they're in school, around 6 hours a day? And for DLI schools, we maximize their time by making sure they become bilingual and biliterate right there while they're already at school. And that allows you to give your child the gift and tool of a second language. But let's talk about time, because how is this achieved and why DLI? What we submit is that DLI is the best use of time, because the kids, like I said, already have to be in school. And so being exposed to the language and being immersed in the target language best utilizes their time in school. For us, it's 3 hours a day, which consistently is 5 days a week, meaning 15 hours a week. Compare that to what a lot of people often resort to, which is Saturday schools. Saturday schools or language schools, which may be 3 or 4 hours on Saturdays, which is not bad, but it's not as effective. In some cases, it's not effective at all. And so what you get in DLI is consistency, day-to-day consistency, as well as, a certain amount of exposure and in the language. And also that it's not just something that's done on the weekend, that's not really graded and not part of a report card. Because this is your school, this is the child's school, people tend to take it a lot more seriously, how they perform in these classes. They want to do well because they want to make an A. It is graded, and that grade is reported to the Department of Education. So there's some, gravity to it. And also with the DLI, it does give the students the necessary time and that desired time so they can really achieve what we want for our students, which is to be bilingual and biliterate. And that, for most of us parents, gives us some peace of mind because we're able to achieve what we want for our kids. We tend to have a lot of questions regarding the same thing, so I'm going to just address those real quick before we stop the recording. A few things, which is the kids do wear uniforms, and you can see that here in this picture. The uniform with the vest is what the uniform is on Tuesdays. And during cold weather, oftentimes you'll see that the undershirt here, the white shirt, is white, and it can be any white shirt. And when the weather's cold, they often wear long sleeves. In warm weather, they wear short sleeves. Now, outside of Tuesdays, they can just wear the shirt, which comes in white, like you see here, or there is a navy option as well.